Today I'm going to be doing something different. I'll be talking about a constructed language I made. It's called Jasmjtis or Jasmjtis. Or Jasmjtis if you want to intone it as it would be in the original language. Any of those is fine, but Jasmjtis is what it would be called by its native speakers. In universe, it's made by somebody called Fivelios Bartholomos. I'm not going to be great at pronouncing these words. I know what the intonation of this language is going to look like. It's going to be primarily trochaic, but I don't know what the phonetics, like where a consonant's aspirated and so on and so forth. I don't know what it would sound like to hear this spoken aloud. I imagine Fivelios, based on the lore, it might sound like I'm pronouncing it because Fivelios is primarily an Anglophone, but he also knows a couple of other languages, so he might mix a bit of those in as well. But yeah, in universe, it's also the ancestor to some languages such as Bukuman, Jahadis, Rechadis, and Ruanite. There's also this merchant speak language that I'm working on. Well, I will work on once I'm done with this one, or sufficiently done with this one. I'll never be done with it until I have a complete dictionary, and even then, language, even a constructed language, it can be an organic thing, especially if I ever get a community to speak it. Like, I think that's all I had for this slide. The alphabet. It's mostly a Roman alphabet, but it's got that weird theta in there. So it goes... If you're not familiar with the International Phonetic Alphabet, I'll pronounce these out loud for you. A, B, Ch, D/the. I'll explain that in a bit. E, F, G, H, I/U, depending on... Well, I'll get there again later. I/Y this is if you've ever spoken Spanish or Latin, you'll know that those languages don't really make a distinction between the vowel E and the consonant IA as a phoneme. I use the same letter for both, except in later Latin where we get the J, because it was made to differentiate it as a vowel and as a consonant. Yeah versus E. But I'll explain how this language deals with ambiguities in that respect later. Then you got K, L, M, N, A/U, P, G, R, S/Z, T, U/W, V, O, J, A, Z, V, Sh, J, C, F, H. I haven't probably done the best of pronouncing those either. But, again, I'm Anglophone, so I'm not sure I'd be pronouncing it as the native community was pronounced it, but maybe as Fivelios himself would have pronounced it. So we move on to the noun cases. If you don't know what noun cases are, nominative is the subject of a sentence. So like, I ate the bread. Going down the line, we have os, oi for names, as, I for tangible objects, is or e for an abstract object. For something that's mathematical specifically, it's us/oi. One of the things that in this universe Fivelios is messing with a group of time-traveling linguists who trapped him on that planet. it's not necessarily their fault, but he still got a little. He's a little bit of a troublemaker. So what he did was he made the written form of the language have slight disparities from the spoken form of the language. This ends up having a bigger effect later on when it evolves into different languages, because some are more true to the spoken form and some are more true to the written form. At any rate, this means that the mathematical and financial objects are pronounced differently than abstract or tangible. And speaking of financial, it's also pronounced us or oi. And a place name is us, I. Now, I mentioned earlier that S can either be pronounced S or Z, and this is where that comes. This is the only place where that it actually applies, because there's actually more than singular or plurals. This is another disparity with the spoken variety of Jasmjtis. Because if an object is non-count, you pronounce it Oz instead of os. So if it were a stone, it would be os. But if it were stone, as in the material, it would be Oz, because stone is a non-count noun. This is also the only case where that becomes relevant. Next, we move on to the accusative case. This is the direct object of the sentence, like the sandwich ate me, for example. So the vowels are pronounced exactly the same ways, but the consonants are and ol. For instance, a name would be om or ol, depending on whether it's singular or plural. Now, this is one case we don't have in English. It's the prepositional. We have the nominative, accusative, and genitive, which is he, him, and his. We only have them for pronouns, but what we don't have is prepositional. And I was looking it up on Wikipedia. Apparently, a lot of languages, usually you have, if you have the prepositional, you also have a couple of other cases that this language doesn't have. But at any rate, this is a constructed language, so Fivelios gets to make the rules, which means I get to make the rules. At any rate, we get the prepositional, which is the the prepositional object of a sentence. So, again, the vowels are exactly the same, but the consonants are n or u, w. I'm gonna do a terrible job pronouncing it if I ever have to, but it is what it is. Then we move on to verb conjugations. This looks like it has the standard 6 conjugations, but actually you'll notice there's more than that. Actually, technically, there's 8. Fivelios was a sort of religious man. He at least believed in the idea of God, so whenever God would do something, he would treat the verb with reference and not conjugate it, because God exists outside of time and space, so conjugating it doesn't quite make sense. It's a weird sort of theology. It's like we English speakers have plenty fine conjugating the verbs that God uses, but it's just one of the quirks of his language. At any rate, the other 7 conjugations, al, as, ad, or ath. This is a place where the d can make multiple sounds depending on whether it's countable or non-count. Again, ad is for countable, like the stone did blank, as in a stone, and ath would be some stone did blank. And then we move on to plural. What we get is some clusivity. It's the difference between we when we includes a speaker and we when it doesn't include the speaker. So like, we're going to the movie. Am I talking about not the speaker. I wrote that down wrong. When we includes the person being addressed. So when I say we're going to the movie, am I talking about myself and a group of people, or am I talking about myself, a group of people, and the person I'm talking to? In English, we don't have this, but in Jasmjtis, we do. And with exclusive, which means excluding the person I'm talking to, it's am. And with inclusive, it's asmi. Then with second person plural, asti. And finally, an. Lastly, we get prepositions. These have numerical agreement with the subject, object, or prepositional object. So, and you'll notice that there's an accent above the U. This is how we differentiate between u and wa in places where it would be ambiguous, such as U and J right next to each other. In this case, because the accent is over the U, it's pronounced as the vowel. So it would be ui. If instead you wanted to pronounce it we, where the J is the vowel, you would put the accent over the J. And I know it sounds kind of strange putting an accent over a J, and there's no really good way to do it with the alphabet as it is. Maybe if I ever run into it again, I'll have to just underline it, but that's the primary use of the accent. It doesn't actually change the metrical stress of the word. It just changes whether something is treated as a vowel or a consonant, specifically with U and J. And for verbs, basically, for the subject, if we wanted to say he was under the tree, you would use us. And if you wanted to say I saw him, him is the direct object, it's the accusative. So you would use for him. It would end with You wouldn't use the word because that's not a word in this language. I haven't gotten to any of the vocabulary yet, but you'll see next video what it would actually look like to conjugate a word. Oh yeah, another thing I forgot to mention. Well, let me get through this first. I saw him under the tree. Him is the accusative, so you'd use and then for the preposition you would use For the verb, I fought him under the tree. If the fight itself takes place under the tree, you would use ur. In the prepositional object, he was under the tree in the meadow. If the tree is in the meadow, then you would use un. So it's assumed he himself was in the meadow, but if you wanted to say something else about the tree, like the tree was purple, well, not that, because that's treated differently. I find myself lacking an example. But basically, if you want the preposition to apply specifically to the prepositional object of a different prepositional clause, you'll have to use un. And it'll also have to have, the prepositional object itself will have to have close proximity. I think, if I remember correctly, it's immediate proximity. Again, I'm still working on this language, but part of making these videos is to formalize it, get it down in not quite a physical, an electronic medium, so I can go back and say, this is how it actually works. Because I've tried to do that with a notebook and it's not quite working for me, so I think having this audio-visual medium might work better. Lastly, I don't remember if I mentioned this, but all words have a verb. No, I don't think I did. All words have a verb form. So all words can be conjugated as a verb. Not all words have a noun form or a prepositional form, but every word has a verb form. Every word can be either used as an infinitive or given one of these 7 conjugations. And this is another way that this is one of the quirks of the language. I don't think I have anything else to say about that, so I need to come up with a good outro.